Just like that, another iconic sedan breathes its last. Maruti Suzuki has confirmed that they're discontinuing the Ciaz by April of this year and will focus more on their SUV and MUV offerings, thus ending Maruti's only mid-size sedan. This decision is not surprising considering its consistently declining sales for the last few years. The car hadn't received any major update since 2018 and was facing some tough competition from cars like Skoda Slavia and Volkswagen Virtus. But this is not just about the Ciaz. Ciaz is not the first car to see this day and certainly won't be the last. This is about the slow and painful death of sedans. Welcome to White Metal. Let's talk about sedans. Ever since the days of the classic Premier Padmini, sedan has been the body type synonymous with cars. When we imagined a car, we imagined a sedan. Of course, there were hatchbacks that did the job, but sedans did it in style. Everyone's dream car was a sedan. Even the people that bought hatchbacks probably aspired to one day buy a sedan. And in the 90s and 2000s, we were fortunate enough to be blessed with some iconic sedans that graced the Indian roads. The 1990s marked a transformative era for the Indian automotive market. As the economy liberalized and global car makers entered the scene, the humble sedan evolved from a symbol of prestige to an attainable aspiration. Cars like the Maruti 1000 and later the Maruti Esteem redefined modernity and class. The Hindustan Contessa, with its muscular stance and American-like proportions, was a status symbol for politicians and industrialists. Meanwhile, Daewoo Cielo brought in a more refined design sensibility, and Fiat Siena attempted to carry forward the legacy of Fiat's long presence in India. This decade set the foundation. Sedans weren't just functional, they were a statement. By the 2000s, the Indian sedan market was in full bloom. A mix of affordability, evolving design, and rising aspirations led to the dominance of models like the Honda City, which quickly became the benchmark for refinement and desirability. The Hyundai Accent, Ford Icon, and Tata Indigo catered to a wide spectrum of buyers, from the sporty to the practical. Even luxury started trickling in with the arrival of the Skoda Octavia, offering premium build and European appeal at a semi-accessible price. Sedans were everywhere, from family garages to company car fleets, and owning one was a mark of having arrived. This was truly the golden age of sedans in India. But in the last 10 years, things haven't been looking that great for sedans. Cars that once ruled the streets are now fighting for their existence. And they're fighting a losing battle. Exactly 10 years ago, sedans occupied about 25% of the market, being the second most popular segment after hatchbacks. Now their market share has dropped down to less than 10%. The only sedans that actually do any significant numbers are the compact ones. Things are even worse for the mid-size sedans. Manufacturers have also reduced their sedan offerings dramatically owing to this consistent decline in sales. Tata went from offering 3 sedans 10 years ago to just 1 in 2025. Mahindra has not been making any sedans for a while now. Skoda, which was a brand known for making cool sedans, only has 1 sedan in its lineup. The last decade, especially the last few years, has seen the demise of many iconic sedans, some of which used to sell like hotcakes back in the day. There was a time when the flagship model of every manufacturer that got the best engine, the best design, and the best features was a sedan. Now it's mostly an SUV. On every car maker's website, you can see more SUVs than sedans and hatchbacks. Most of the sedans that still exist in the market are compact sedans whose appeal is more functional than aesthetic. They're mostly bought as a part of fleets for commercial use, and one of their attractions tends to be the boot space that can be used to install a CNG cylinder. Mid-size sedans, on the other hand, are the more interesting cars, filled with character. These are actually a dying breed. They are dying slowly and painfully, and we all know who their killer is: SUVs. There was a time in the past when there was a clear distinction between sedans and SUVs. Both of them behaved differently and were meant for completely different purposes. Sedans, with their low center of gravity and aerodynamic design, offered a smoother and more comfortable ride with less body roll and better handling. They performed better and were more fuel efficient. With the engine bay and the boot space separated from the cabin, they were optimized for passenger comfort. The sedan body type itself gave a fair amount of freedom to the designers to experiment with some crazy profiles. And this added a lot of character to these cars. They could make these cars look as fast as they went. This body type was perfect for luxury cars that focused on performance and passenger comfort. The 1970s and 1980s is when the luxury sedans as we know them now started taking shape. This time saw European manufacturers like Mercedes-Benz and BMW redefine the segment, focusing more on engineering prowess and driving dynamics. They introduced relatively compact luxury sedans like the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, which exemplified cutting-edge technology.
Engineered like no other car in the world.
And the BMW 7 Series, which offered a thrilling driving experience without compromising sophistication. SUVs, on the other hand, were extremely functional vehicles. They were not built to be driven on the road like a usual car. The term SUV back then was synonymous with a four-wheel drive. These were cars like the original Land Rover Defender, Toyota Land Cruiser, or the Jeep Wrangler. They were dedicated off-roaders without much attention being paid to on-road refinement. They had a ladder frame chassis just like trucks, a high ground clearance, solid axle, short overhangs, and 4x4 systems with low-range gearboxes that made them perfect for riding off the tarmac and carrying heavy loads. Even their interiors did not have any fancy upholstery, soft touch materials, or any such luxury features. Everything you need, nothing you don't. This was a segment that had its roots in military applications. What they could do was way more important than how they looked or how they felt. They were meant to be used by military personnel, farmers, and adventurers to go anywhere, haul anything, and be fixed easily if they broke down. So even if it's a no-brainer today, back in the day, the idea of a practical SUV with high ground clearance and an illusion of tough off-road capability in a package that drove and felt like a usual car was rather new. So Land Rover set out to do just that, and in 1970, the first generation of Range Rover was born. It was what they called a civilized SUV that could cruise comfortably on the highway and climb the hills if needed. Even if it wasn't specifically the intention, in 1980, a version of the Range Rover was launched in collaboration with the fashion magazine Vogue, with luxury features like carpets, wooden trims, picnic hamper, and cool box. The seeds of luxury SUVs of the future had just been sown. It took some time, but by the 1990s, other luxury car manufacturers realized they could do this too and actually do it better. And this is when the Range Rover started facing some serious competition when BMW launched the X5, which would eventually expand into the X series lineup. Then Mercedes-Benz launched the M-Class, which would eventually become the GLE class we know today. And just like that, luxury SUVs became a legitimate segment of cars. Now let's talk about India. In the 2000s, we had our fair share of wonderful SUVs like Mahindra Scorpio and Bolero, Honda CR-V, Maruti Suzuki Grand Vitara, Tata Safari, and their likes that were phenomenal at what they did. And like any new technology or framework in the auto industry, starts at the top with the expensive brands and eventually trickles down to the more affordable ones. This trend of civilized SUVs also finally trickled down to India. And in 2012, Renault launched a car that would set in motion a wave in the Indian market that would change everything forever. And this car was the Renault Duster. It came with four-wheel drive as an option. It was bigger than a hatchback, but smaller than a full-size SUV. It looked rugged and capable of off-roading, but was also great in the city and highways. It was more than just a little bit of everything. The very next year, Ford launched the EcoSport. That was a little more sophisticated than the Duster and did not come with four-wheel drive. It was basically a hatchback with more ground clearance and a higher driving position. But it was perfect to make the customers think that they're buying an SUV for the price of a slightly expensive hatchback. And this is how crossovers or compact crossovers were born. A new addition to the broader category of SUVs. And in the next 10 years, these crossovers and SUVs would eat up the Indian market like a predator on loose. Looking at the success of Duster and EcoSport, pretty much all manufacturers started making crossovers. Hyundai Creta, Maruti Suzuki S-Cross, Tata Nexon, Honda WRV, these things popped up everywhere and there was no stopping. By 2023, SUVs had become the dominant segment with over 40% of the market share. And as the last decade went by, every car manufacturer stopped everything they're doing and shifted their focus almost exclusively on SUVs. The growing popularity of SUVs hurt every other car segment. Hatchbacks couldn't beat the SUVs, So they joined them. They went through a transformation of their own. Manufacturers realized that SUVs are more than just a technical category of cars. They are also a perception. They realized if they could just make hatchbacks look more rugged, give them a little more ground clearance, and create this whole illusion of toughness and durability, they could basically sell them as SUVs. And that's how cars like Maruti Suzuki Ignis and Tata Punch were born. And if you remember, the Tata Punch was the most sold car last year. But sedans unfortunately couldn't do that. Their appeal was closely tied to their body type. And from the customer's perspective, SUVs were really looking like a much better value proposition than sedans. You see, in the last few decades, SUVs have changed a lot. Back in the day, there was a world of difference between how SUVs drove and how sedans drove. But SUVs have since caught up, and that gap has closed significantly. In luxury cars, SUVs like the BMW X Series get all the luxury features that their sedan counterparts get. With brands like Porsche and Lamborghini entering this segment, they've figured out how to make SUVs feel almost as good as a sports car. Even Ferrari, which swore to never go this road, couldn't help themselves. Of course, they don't call it an SUV, they call it an FUV, a Ferrari utility vehicle instead, whatever that is. And in the more affordable cars, especially in India, SUVs became a solution for the bad road conditions. If you own a sedan in India, especially an expensive one, you're always going to be worried about scraping the floor on a speed breaker or damaging your bumper on a pothole. But if you're getting all the features of a sedan, just as much the ride comfort, pretty much the same engine but in a car with a high-seated position that looks like it could endure the Indian roads, why wouldn't you buy it? In a country where most people have only one car in their garage, they need a car that can do everything. And SUVs are just better at convincing the customers that they can do everything than sedans. So what does the future look like for sedans? At this point, every sedan purchase for personal use is a decision made from the heart, and it hurts to see them go. We grew up watching these cars become cooler and cooler over the years. We all had a dream car when we were a child, and it was almost always a sedan. Companies like Volkswagen, Skoda, and Hyundai are trying to keep these dying beasts alive, but they're struggling. And it's hard to tell how long they'll be able to keep doing so. Maybe sedans will never actually die completely. Maybe they'll always be around as a small segment somewhere. But it will probably be just for namesake, because it's looking like even manufacturers are showering all of their love on SUVs. But somewhere deep inside all of our hearts, there will always be a sedan we can't buy anymore. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. See you in the next video.